Welcome everybody to another CTC Software webinar. My name is Sean Zerbis, the Director of Development here at CTC Software, and today we get to continue with the Nexus CMS Admin Learning Series, focusing today on processing Revit content, specifically Revit content. As always, of course, these webinars are recorded so that you can go back and watch this kind of content in the future via, in our case, the YouTube channel. Now, if you're watching this on YouTube, we hope you find this information valuable. Maybe it'll earn a like and subscribe from you. That would be great. It helps the channel grow, helps everybody else find good videos, and it helps you get notified if you subscribe when the new videos do go current in case you miss a live webinar. Now, for those of you in the live webinar with me today here, we do keep our eyes on the questions window. So if you want to go in and ask a question about how to do something specific related to today's content while I'm going through it, please, by all means, go in there, ask a question. I try to answer those live while we're going through the topic. Without further ado, let's jump right in and take a look at today's topic in detail. So we've gone through in the previous portions of this series how to configure the CMS, the Nexus CMS. We've gone through library setup, user setup, rights, getting everything established there. But if you're a Revit user, right now, adding content is the last step here, really, in preparing to get this set up for all your users to really go crazy with and start using it in detail in your production environment. Now, most things are pretty easy to add. Simply drag and drop it, you're done. But Revit content specifically, we've got some specific controls, some special controls that are available. And today, we're going to dig deep into the general content adding controls for both component families and system families. We're going to go through a few specific objectives here. We're going to talk about the different types of Revit content that are available. We're going to look at processing component families, that is RFAs, into the Nexus CMS. We're going to also take a look at processing project-hosted content, system families, and views into the Nexus CMS. And then we're going to talk about how you can plan in the future to update and maintain your content that you've already processed, and some things you might want to consider about that. Now, first off, let's talk about different kinds of Revit content that we can process. I'm not going to have a super exhaustive list. If you want to know what the 100% list is, you can take a look at it in our help documentation. But today, in Revit, we're going to take a look at some content that we can actually process into the CMS environment here. The first thing that we're going to take a look at, if I click over into Revit, and I'm in the basic sample project here that you can get with Revit, so if you wanted to follow along and do exactly what I'm doing, you can do that. I happen to be in Revit 23. The version doesn't really matter. Nexus today supports Revit 2021 through 2025, but that doesn't really matter for today's purposes because the support of content is all pretty much the same. If I expand out the families list over here, the first thing we're going to take a look at is component families. That would be things like doors, things like windows. If I had windows in here, I do at the very bottom. There we go. There's some windows. Things like duct types, right? If I go to ducts here, oval duct, right? There's some duct types. Actually, that's a system family, but there's fittings that go along with those as well. I'm not actually seeing duct fittings in the list because, well, this is an architecture project, so not going to see that. Air terminals, if this was an MEP project, I would see some air terminals in here. Anything that could be saved out as a .rfa. In fact, if you right-click on a piece of content, an actual family, and you click Edit on it, and it opens up into the family editor environment, like in this case, entrance door.rfa, that content 100% can be added into the CMS. No question, RFA content, absolutely addable into the content management system. And we call these types of components, these .rfa files, those are component families. And that's true even of annotation symbols, right? Annotation symbols in here like title blocks, those can be saved out as .rfas. Room tags, all those tagging components, those are all RFAs as well. Those are all considered loadable component families. And so we'll be taking a look at loading component families here in just a moment. I just want to point out terminology-wise what that exactly is. Other kinds of family content inside of this family browser, if I scroll down into walls down here, basic walls and curtain walls and stack walls, these are system families. These cannot be directly edited out of the project. There's no edit option right here. And that's because these kinds of content can only exist within the boundary of a project. And in fact, if you wanted to transfer these from one project to another, typically the way that you would go about transferring that is by going up to Manage and Transfer Project Standards. So pretty much everything that can be transferred with Transfer Project Standards, I said pretty much, I would say 90% of those items can all be hosted directly within the Nexus CMS. So walls, system families is one thing that can be transferred. You do not see over here in the project browser view templates. So if I go to view, I go to view templates, right? Manage view templates. This list of view templates can actually be processed as well. They can be hosted directly, but they're also considered a system family because they are also transferred with Transfer Project Standards. So same transfer technique. Similarly down here, groups. There's model groups inside of here. There's an array group that exists called Array Group 1. Any model groups and detail groups that are hosted in the project, that's also considered a system family, sort of, even though it contains component families in a lot of cases. It is effectively a system family hosted within the project environment, and these can be hosted in the Nexus CMS as well. And then something else, text types here. Looking at these text types, these standards, dimension types, those two things, fill patterns for hatches, for both model and detail drafting fill patterns, all of that sort of stuff that you would host within the definition of a project, that's all stuff that can be transferred into or processed into the CMS. And again, that's not an exhaustive list, that's just sort of the start. Another thing that can be processed in specifically would be detail views. So if you've got drafting views or detail views, those can be processed in any two-dimensional detail view, and any sheets that exclusively contain two-dimensional detailed views or drafting views can be processed directly in. And this would be something that you would typically transfer into a project by using insert from file, insert views from file. These views, these drafting views or sheets, if you can transfer it here, you can also process that directly into the CMS in the Nexus suite. So how do we do that? How do we actually start doing some of this processing? So we're going to take a look at how to process first component families. This is the most straightforward, and I'm going to give you some tips and tricks about processing component families here so you can kind of see how this might work. Now, most of everything else I'm going to do today, I'll be doing directly in the CMS itself. And I'm going to pin this to the foreground right now so that as I add content to this space, it doesn't like accidentally get pushed behind Revit or pushed behind my PowerPoint here. So I'm going to keep this out on top for right now. So within here, one of the first things you want to make sure you do no matter what kind of content you're processing is choose an appropriate library into which that content will be processed. For me, I have a library that I just made today called Revit Content Webinar. And I'm going to go ahead and throw all this content into here for anything that I actually process. So Revit Content Webinar. While you're processing content, again, it doesn't matter what kind of content, whether it's just general Windows files, whether it's Revit or AutoCAD content, irrelevant. You can choose some tags you might want to associate to that. That all can be done as well. For right now, I'm going to ignore tagging. That's not really super relevant for what I'm talking about today. Now, here in the selected content window with Add Content, and this, by the way, is something you will have if you are a CMS admin or if you are a library manager. One of those two will give you the ability to add content, or I should say org admin as well. If you're an organization admin, those three things would give you the ability to add content and have access to this button over here. So since I'm signed in as, well, myself, I'm signed in as an organization admin, I have God level controls across the entire system, including the ability to add content. And one thing I should point out, if you are a library manager, you may not see the full list of libraries. You may only see libraries to which you are assigned the manager level role. So you can still use these processes, it's just you'll only have libraries that you can actually manage. CMS admins, org admins, you guys can control everything. So I've chosen my library. I'm about to add some files. And there's 3 different major ways you can add files in Revit. You can either use add files, which lets you browse through windows to find something. You can use add a folder of content, which gives you a folder browser and it'll add all the content in that folder. Or thirdly, in the way that I personally prefer, I like to use my Windows Explorer window over here. And so what I like to do is browse to a folder that has my content. Like in my case, I very poorly put this stuff on my desktop. That's not usually ideal. Usually you want this stuff centralized so more than one person has access to it, but this is just for training for today. My CMS admin learning folder is where I'm in, and I have a whole directory of some content here, some model content that's available. I have some annotation content. These would be the different types of tags and title blocks that are available inside of Revit. That I had exported actually from a project. So this is everything that was in one of my architectural models. So I took the model folder here. If I go into doors as an example, I can grab either 1 file or 2 files at a time and drag and drop them into this area. Or what's probably even more efficient is grabbing an entire folder of content and dropping it over here. And it usually adds pretty quickly. Yeah, this stuff threw in there just really fast. There's 36 components inside of there. Another thing that you can do, let me remove all of this just so you can see exactly how this works. I'm going to go back to my main content directory, take a look at the annotation folder here. Now remember, in the annotation folder, there's a bunch of subfolders. Some of these subfolders have 1 or 2 components in them, but there's a whole bunch of subfolders here. You can go to the top level directory if you want and drag the entire thing over here. I don't actually know how long this is going to take. Not very long at all. That was super fast. Right, that's fantastic. It grabbed 27 pieces of content from all those subdirectories. So you can actually go to your highest level folder if you want to, multiple version years if you want to, and throw all of that content into the CMS and get it ready to be processed. Now, none of this content is actually being processed right now. For now, what this is doing is just waiting for me to tell it to go, because it lets me review this list. There might be some things in here maybe that I don't want to process. Maybe I don't want things like the mark pointers. That might be kind of silly for me to bring that in. Maybe I don't need the bodies for these elevation marks. Maybe this isn't something that I would want to have inside of the Nexus CMS space. Maybe you do, and that's totally fine. But for me, in my case, I don't want those, so I'm going to intentionally remove those from the list. There's a few other things in here that just for today's purposes, I'm going to choose not to add. I'm only going to add a couple of these items here just so you can see the processing actually take place. So I'm just going to add these 3, the area tag, callout tag, and door tag. And if I click process, it will take in my current version of Revit here, Revit 2023, that's what I have opened in the background with that sample model. It will use that session of Revit to open the family, to scan it for its properties, to log that information so it makes it searchable. Depending on your cloud options, if you have it told the cloud host, it will then upload the original version of the family. In this case, it happens to be the same version, Revit 23 and 23, but that's not mandatory. That's just, it happens to be the same right now. But it would upload the original version. It will also do things like generating a preview image depending on your preview image settings. We talked about that content processor settings in a previous session for configuring all of that. And then it moves on to the next family, and it does the same thing. So with Revit family content, RFA content, all that matters is the version of the file, and that you have available either that version or a newer version of Revit available for it to open and scan that content in it, in that version, okay? So in my case, it happens to be equal, but that doesn't really matter. So if I click process here, it's gonna activate Revit here in the background, and it's going to, in the background, sort of open up that family, scan it, get all of its data, make it searchable, get a preview, upload all of that to the cloud because this is a cloud-hosted library, and then it moves on to the next family. We can see the progress there. And in this case, all 3 of these, they were successful. That's fantastic. If your families happen to open with an error, like constraints can't be satisfied or something, every once in a while that will happen. This will let you know if there was any warnings or any issues with the content as it was being processed, so you can pay attention to that and take some actions to fix that content, make it more stable, okay? The Nexus CMS wants stuff to load cleanly. If it can't open up in Revit natively, it's not going to load cleanly for the end users either. So it wants you to have nice, good, and clean content that opens and processes and loads well. So that was 3 pieces of content that were thrown directly into the Revit content webinar library. Those were just annotation symbols. Let's just do a couple of others here real quick. If I go back into my model folder, if I go into doors as my example, take a look at my swing single, swing double doors, throw those over here. They have currently a preview that's associated to them. You can see it's kind of showing the wall and showing the door in the wall, not necessarily the greatest preview, but because I've already configured my content processor settings, it should refactor those and make them look pretty good as it actually presents them into the system. Now, one other thing I want to point out, I'm processing this content exclusively today in Revit 2023. If something like this swing double or swing single door already exists, that's great. It will just add this new entry to it for 23. And because of some settings I had set in the portal, we talked about manager settings in an earlier session. We talked about how you can have these things automatically upgrade for Revit content. Mine is told to automatically upgrade. So because I'm processing in Revit 23, in just a moment here, when I go search for this content, I can verify that it's automatically upgraded to Revit 24 and 25. It obviously doesn't downgrade, so any older content is whatever that older content is, okay? So let's go take a look real quick here and run a search to see what that might look like. If I go to my Revit content webinar, I should have 5 total things inside of here. In fact, I do. I have my area tag, my callout head, my door tag, and then I've got some previews up here. Now, some of these previews might take a minute for them to actually fully refresh, but they will eventually refresh. My previews for my annotation symbols, they look pretty good. I did a good zoom extents and kind of cleared all that up. But yeah, this content now is in here. If I go take a look at the swing single door that I just processed last, let's go take a look at the detail for this. This is one that I've used in previous webinars before. That's why it already pre-exists with the wrong preview right now. It's going to refresh that eventually. And for right now, I have a 2018 piece of content and a 2020 piece of content that I had processed years ago. I just today processed Revit 2023, and it hasn't fully gone through the upgrade process, but I suspect by the end of our webinar, that auto upgrade will have taken effect, and I'll have a 24 and a 25 for this door, and I didn't have to do anything special to get that to work out. So, but yeah, this content, when I process it in the future to, quote, update something, it just automatically looks for and says, do I already have a component like this? Is it the same name of content? Is it the same Revit category of content? And is it the same general units of measure, meaning imperial units or metric units? And if it finds those 3 things to be the same, it just combines it into a single content entry for the end user and now stores in that object's data. I didn't mean to load that. I'm just kidding. Cancel that. It stores in that object's data the versions of Revit that it knows to associate to. So when a user goes to load it, it will load the most relevant version for them, the newest one that it possibly can load by default. Okay, that is the core, let me unpin this for a minute, of processing Revit component families, .rfa files saved on your network. We'll take another look at another way of processing component families here in just a moment, but I want to do that in collaboration with processing system families. This is all the stuff that is hosted directly within a Revit project model. How do we process this? So once again, to process content into the CMS, of course, you have to have the CMS open. And to process content into the CMS, especially that which is system family content that's hosted in a project model, you have to have a project model open. And so I have Revit 23 open here. And again, I have the basic sample project available. So if you wanted to follow along and do something very similar, you absolutely could. But I have to have a project model actively open in my Revit session so that the Nexus CMS can source content from it. And it's going to pull discrete components from within this project model into my add content window over here, whatever it is I choose to add to it. So this would be things like sheets, like walls, like duct types and system all those system families, drafting views, model groups, you name it. If it exists in the project and it can be processed into the CMS, it will let you do that. And the way that you do this, once again, is you choose the library you want to process into. I've already got the Revit content webinar set. Remembered that from before. I'm going to do add from Revit project, and you actually have two options in this latest version of Revit. By the way, I'm in Revit, I'm in the Nexus CMS version 25.5 right now. And if you don't have that one yet, I suggest you get that latest version because we have the ability to add system family content, which is the typical model elements directly from a project. But we also have component families now as well. This is why I was waiting to talk about component family loads this way. So if I take just a single step back and talk about component family loading, now you can tell it to add component families. That's the components portion. And you'll notice that you have all those categories of content that are loadable component families, the RFAs, so things like doors and door tags, the same things that I loaded before. Things like generic models and plumbing fixtures and profiles, and all those items that you could load as a .rfa, you can now source directly from a warehouse or container project file, just like all the rest of your standards. For those of you who are doing this process from a BIM 360 or ACC hosted standards project model, now you can actually source your Revit families directly from that same project model. So if I wanted to right now process in some kind of a door family, I would say, hey, get that single flush door or the M double flush door and add those elements to my list, and it will know that those particular objects are coming from that particular Revit project file that is wherever it's stored. In my case, on my C drive, but you may very well have this be up on the Autodesk Construction Cloud or BIM 360. So you can go ahead and leverage that as well. The other things you can load from a project, and I'm going to do this next, this is the system families. These are non.rfa content, things like wall types and views and things like that. This list takes a little bit longer to generate than the normal component families list takes to generate. But when this list comes up, I can choose almost everything that I would probably want to transfer with transfer project standards and have that hosted directly in the Nexus CMS. And so you can, again, be selective with this. This is why it doesn't automatically process immediately for you right now. It allows you the ability here to make some choices first and kind of cull the list down to something that you want. And then when you're ready, you can click process. And by the way, while this is popping up and processing this list, I want to make another little comment for you. If you're going to process onesie, twosie items like I've done today, no big deal. Click process, let it rip. Just watch it happen. It's, it's kind of fun when you're just like, 1 to 10 items. If you're going to be processing thousands of items though, do it when you're not going to be using your computer, because it will continually activate the background session of Revit. And if you're on some other monitor and you're typing stuff out, and if you're like me and you watch your keyboard while you type, because I can't touch type very well, then you'll oftentimes be trying to interact with Revit instead of interacting with whatever you're trying to author up on some other monitor. So try not to use your computer when you're going through a massive process of thousands of items. Let Revit have control of it for a little while Nexus is processing. Okay, here in the categories list that's fully populated, now you can see there's a ton of different system families here. It's whatever's loaded into this actual background project. So I have cable trays and ceilings, conduit types, detail items that are repeating detail items, dimension types inside of here, drafting and model fill patterns, right? There's all kinds of standards. Material definitions can be processed into the CMS. This, you can see a pretty full list of a lot of the things that are available here. Model groups, detail groups, pipe systems, schedules as components can be processed in, typical sheets can be processed. stair types, you name it, man. There's a lot of stuff that can be processed into this environment. In my case here, I'm just going to choose a few of these walls and add those to my list. Just a couple of these here, some stacked walls, some basic walls. We'll add those elements into this list. Maybe I'll add a sheet here or a text type. Yeah, we'll add a text type right here. I don't know, what else we got that we might want to add? Let's see. I think a drafting view might be good, or a drafting pattern might be good. We'll just grab something like brickwork right here. Give me that. Thank you. Add elements. All right. So it's going to add a bunch of things to this list. And I have some component families that are coming out of this project side by side with system families and drafting patterns and text types. And I could put drafting views again. You can put anything in here that you want. Ultimately, when you click process here, this is going to take just a little bit longer, and this time it does matter what version of Revit you're in, because the version that you've opened up, that's the version in which all this content will be processed. Earlier, I had mentioned about component families. If you just drag and drop a component family from Windows in, it's going to use whatever version it was and upload the original Revit family. Well, this is editing the family out of the project to be able to process it, so it will be in the version that you actively have open. 100% the active version of Revit. That's true also of the system families. It has to pull them out of this active version. So if you wanted this in an older edition of Revit, that's fine. Just make sure you're opening that version of Revit and opening the project in the correct version year and processing from there. Regardless, all of this content will still be able to be automatically upgraded to future version years. So this will go to 24 and 25 when that process kicks in. I'm going to go ahead and click process here, and this is going to do very much the same exact thing that it did earlier. It's going to open up each family or each component in its own environment. It's going to generate a preview. It's going to create a little micro file for it to process to the cloud if you're doing cloud caching of content. And it's going to get all the data and then publish it so that it's all searchable and usable by whomever is going to be searching the content in this Revit content webinar library that I've put together. Okay. Now, one thing I'm going to point out here as we lead into the next topic, you might notice I've been processing everything off my C drive. That's not really wise. I should be processing this probably off of an Autodesk Construction Cloud centralized model or off of some kind of network drive in my environment so that other team members have a chance of being able to partner with me and update that content. I'm doing this just today for the example of the webinar, so I can just have everything locally and quickly do this work, but ideally this would be coming off of some central drive. So let's let this process, and then I'm going to do one more content process here once this is complete and show you one other special thing that you can do in Revit that I have not seen any other content management system in the industry be able to do. While this is processing, I'm going to prep for this by pulling forward the portal. Actually, I can't because, well, remember what I told you? Don't try to do work while Revit's processing or while the Nexus CMS is processing. It continually activates Revit, brings it to the foreground. So just let it do its thing. All right. And I'm going to also answer a question that I often get from our customers here, and that is, if you want to process an older version of Revit content, but like you do not want that to upgrade to future versions all the time, is there a way to do that? And the answer is absolutely. And it's in exactly the same location I'm about to go to right now. So I am now in the portal, and in a previous session, we talked in super deep detail about all of these settings here on the CMS organization areas, one of our earlier recorded webinars in this series. I encourage you to go back and take a look at it. I'm going to explain two of those settings right now that relate to everything we've been talking about today. One is the enable automatic upgrades for Revit content. If you do not want this to happen on your content, you want to process something older and you don't want it to upgrade forward, simply uncheck the box and save your settings, and then it will no longer do the automatic upgrade of Revit content from anything that you process. This triggers for anything that you are actively processing right now. So all the stuff that I'd already processed, it's already in that upgrade cycle. But if I was to add new stuff to the CMS right now and process it, It would not affect it at this point. There's also an option here. We talked about this, but I didn't turn it on earlier, and that was enable resources management for Revit content. Now I'm going to turn it on now and show you what this does with a discrete piece of content so you can see exactly how this can work. And this is special to the Nexus CMS. I've not seen anybody else do this kind of thing. So I'm going to save this setting here. It's going to save this. And just to be sure these settings all 100% take effect, I am very intentionally going to close the CMS, and I'm going to reopen the CMS so that it re-looks at all these settings up here right now as I'm reopening it, and I can guarantee that it'll have the latest and greatest settings from the portal that I've just configured. I want to make sure that those are all established here. So my CMS is in the process right now of reopening in 25.5. And we are going to now process in a new piece of content. Well, it's actually the exact same piece of content that I added earlier, one of the doors that I have. And so I'm going to go back here to, actually it's a different copy of the same door. It probably is the same exact door as this one right here, swing single. If I throw this into this environment, it's going to take just a little bit longer for it to add this door. You'll see a little progress bar there across the top because it's scanning this door while it's adding it and looking for any custom materials that are embedded within this door. It's looking for material parameters or material usage on the solids inside of there. And if it finds a custom material and it finds that custom material's image assets, you're going to see some extra new tabs show up here that maybe you've never seen before. It's finding the fact that there's embedded content within this door. That embedded piece of content here is a Revit material. If you remember, when I was adding content directly from the Revit project, materials was something that I could have chosen to add. And now it's actually pulling this material out of a piece of door content that I added. It would do exactly the same thing out of Revit content if you wanted. But it's pulling that material out, and it's letting me actually override this to put it in a different library. So if I had a material-specific library, I could throw it there. Or if I don't override it, it will go into whatever library I'm processing my main content, like the Revit content webinar library that I was using earlier. And it tells me even the source file or source Revit family, system family that it's coming from. It's saying it came from swing single, because I might have added 3 or 4 or 5 doors, and one of them is going to be the source for this particular material. If there was more than one family that had the same exact material definition in it, I could choose which family I wanted to use as sort of the record file for this. So, yep, fantastic. Now, it also has reached into this material, and it's finding that there's an external file, a JPEG, that supports the oak material that is on that in the first place, and it tells me the exact network path where this was found at. So in my case, it's on my network drive, because you should be having your source content like this on your network drive. And it gives me the opportunity here, if I want to override the destination on the user's local computer when it loads it down. Now, if I don't do this, it will just always reference this network drive, and that's great. But if you have users who are remote from the office, they're working not connected to a VPN, you may want that to force it to go to a specific location on the user's computer. So you can have maybe a centralized like C drive, Revit materials directory of content, and you can have this force pushed to their machine. And as it loads that material into their project, and as it loads the door, which has the material into their project, it will force update this material in their project environment to reference this destination location for the material. Incredibly powerful. If you happen to be a content provider for a bunch of people and you have public libraries as a manufacturer, you may have special material assets. They won't have access to your network. That just doesn't happen, right? Because they're in their own firm and you're the content distributor. Well, you can take all of your materials and you can dump them into, say, a manufacturer X materials library on the user's local machine. You get to specify where this goes for your materials, and then that will tell your material definitions to go there. And that's pretty fantastic, because now these material assets that can't normally be universally distributed can much more easily be universally distributed, right? Super powerful there. So if I process this, it's going to go through the exercise of actually processing it's got some version issue with this particular piece of, oh, I see. It understands that there's some previous versions and it wants to know if I want to remove some of those. That's fine. Just remove those. That'll be okay. And it's going to go ahead and reprocess that piece of content and do what it's supposed to do. Okay. Now that I have that process, let's talk about one other thing here, which is how do you best update your content in the future? What is the best possible way to do that? Well, the answer is you just, as you make updates, reprocess exactly as you've seen me do today with whatever the appropriate settings are that you need. Just reprocess it. As you saw with that door that I processed earlier, it had an older edition of that door from 2018 and 2020, and I added to it today the Revit 2023 version. And that Revit 2023 version, in my case, is going to automatically upgrade once that process kicks off. But all you got to do is just, when you make an update, throw it into the CMS and process it. If the path changes, it'll update the path. If the content inside the family changes, it'll update that data for that version and all future stuff. That's fantastic. So yeah, you should be able to just reprocess some stuff. Updating content is really not complicated. It's exactly the same as adding content. The Nexus CMS takes care of pretty much everything. Now, there is one trick that you can do here. If you go into the export content, you can actually download a list of all of your Revit content that exists within a specific library, and then you can use that to update that content in the future. We have another webinar that talks about a more advanced updating workflow for this, but normally when you're planning for content updates, best thing to do, make sure you're processing off a centralized location that your team can all pretty much get access to if they're content managers. So you're all maintaining and managing the same content in the same place, and then just reprocess things as there's updates. That's the biggest thing to really be considering. All right. For those of you who are watching this as a YouTube recording, once again, I want to say thank you, and we hope you found this content valuable. We hope you can use this in your content management process when you're processing in Revit content. And we hope to see you in future CTC webinars as well, for sure. And we also hope that you found this valuable enough to maybe like the video, subscribe, all the things, so that you can get notified when there's other future stuff. And it kind of helps other team members who are also using the Nexus CMS to be able to find this content more easily.